The year is 1177 BCE. The Mediterranean burns. Ships with horned helmets cut through blood-red waters as entire civilizations crumble in a single generation. The Egyptians call them the Sea Peoples, faceless destroyers who appear from nowhere, leaving only ash and silence in their wake. But this isn't where our story begins. No. To understand how the greatest age in human history died, we must first witness how it was born. Close your eyes and imagine a world without cities, without kings, without the gleaming bronze that would define an entire era. A world where humans huddle around fires, telling stories of gods who walk among mortals, where the line between myth and reality blurs like smoke in the wind. This is the world before bronze, before humanity learned to transform the very earth beneath their feet into tools, weapons, and dreams made manifest. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, let me take you on a journey through time itself, a journey through the Bronze Age, humanity's first golden era, when we built our first empires, wrote our first laws, and forged the very foundation of civilization as we know it. This is the story of how bronze changed everything, and how its end would plunge the world into darkness for centuries to come. Picture the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers dance together like silver serpents through emerald fields. Here, in the shadow of reed-woven temples, a discovery would change the course of human history forever. It wasn't the work of heroes or kings. It was the patient experimentation of countless unnamed craftsmen, their faces lit by the orange glow of furnaces, their hands blackened by soot and hope. "Look," whispers an ancient smith to his apprentice, holding up a small, gleaming object that catches the firelight like trapped sunlight. "See how it holds its edge? See how it doesn't crack like stone or bend like copper?" This moment, multiplied across 1,000 workshops, 1,000 nights, 1,000 patient failures, marks humanity's first great technological revolution. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin that would prove harder than anything nature provided, more reliable than stone, more durable than wood. But bronze was more than just a better tool. It was a key that unlocked the doors to civilization itself. In the city of Uruk, already ancient by our standards, the first true cities began to take shape. Imagine walking through those narrow streets at dawn, hearing the rhythm of hammers on anvils, the calls of merchants hawking their wares, the shuffle of thousands of feet on packed earth, the air thick with smoke from countless workshops where bronze was born again and again, each piece a small miracle of human ingenuity. The Sumerians, those brilliant pioneers of the written word, scratched their first tentative symbols into clay tablets by lamplight. They weren't just recording grain stores or trade agreements, they were capturing human thought itself, making it permanent, making it immortal. And what did they choose to preserve first? Stories. Stories of Gilgamesh, the king who sought immortality. Stories of Inanna, the goddess who descended into the underworld. Stories that we still tell today, their echoes reaching across 5,000 years to touch your dreams tonight. But bronze demanded sacrifice. The tin necessary for its creation came from distant lands, Cornwall in far-off Britain, the mountains of Afghanistan, the mysterious regions beyond the known world. This hunger for tin would drive humanity to its first great age of exploration, creating trade routes that stretched across continents like golden threads, binding cultures together in ways that had never existed before. Picture the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers dance together like silver serpents through emerald fields. Here, in the shadow of reed-woven temples, a discovery would change the course of human history forever. It wasn't the work of heroes or kings. It was the patient experimentation of countless unnamed craftsmen, their faces lit by the orange glow of furnaces, their hands blackened by soot and hope. "Look," whispers an ancient smith to his apprentice, holding up a small, gleaming object that catches the firelight like trapped sunlight. "See how it holds its edge? See how it doesn't crack like stone or bend like copper?" This moment, multiplied across 1,000 workshops, 1,000 nights, 1,000 patient failures, marks humanity's first great technological revolution. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin that would prove harder than anything nature provided, more reliable than stone, more durable than wood. But bronze was more than just a better tool. It was a key that unlocked the doors to civilization itself. In the city of Uruk, already ancient by our standards, the first true cities began to take shape. Imagine walking through those narrow streets at dawn, hearing the rhythm of hammers on anvils, the calls of merchants hawking their wares, the shuffle of thousands of feet on packed earth, the air thick with smoke from countless workshops where bronze was born again and again, each piece a small miracle of human ingenuity. The Sumerians, those brilliant pioneers of the written word, scratched their first tentative symbols into clay tablets by lamplight. They weren't just recording grain stores or trade agreements, they were capturing human thought itself, making it permanent, making it immortal. And what did they choose to preserve first? Stories. Stories of Gilgamesh, the king who sought immortality. Stories of Inanna, the goddess who descended into the underworld. Stories that we still tell today, their echoes reaching across 5,000 years to touch your dreams tonight. But bronze demanded sacrifice. The tin necessary for its creation came from distant lands, Cornwall in far-off Britain, the mountains of Afghanistan, the mysterious regions beyond the known world. This hunger for tin would drive humanity to its first great age of exploration, creating trade routes that stretched across continents like golden threads, binding cultures together in ways that had never existed before. Picture the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers danced together like silver serpents through emerald fields. Here, in the shadow of reed-woven temples, a discovery would change the course of human history forever. It wasn't the work of heroes or kings. It was the patient experimentation of countless unnamed craftsmen, their faces lit by the orange glow of furnaces, their hands blackened by soot and hope. "Look," whispers an ancient smith to his apprentice, holding up a small, gleaming object that catches the firelight like trapped sunlight. "See how it holds its edge? See how it doesn't crack like stone or bend like copper?" This moment, multiplied across 1,000 workshops, 1,000 nights, 1,000 patient failures, marks humanity's first great technological revolution. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin that would prove harder than anything nature provided, more reliable than stone, more durable than wood. But bronze was more than just a better tool. It was a key that unlocked the doors to civilization itself. In the city of Uruk, already ancient by our standards, the first true cities began to take shape. Imagine walking through those narrow streets at dawn, hearing the rhythm of hammers on anvils, the calls of merchants hawking their wares, the shuffle of thousands of feet on packed earth, the air thick with smoke from countless workshops where bronze was born again and again, each piece a small miracle of human ingenuity. The Sumerians, those brilliant pioneers of the written word, scratched their first tentative symbols into clay tablets by lamplight. They weren't just recording grain stores or trade agreements, they were capturing human thought itself, making it permanent, making it immortal. And what did they choose to preserve first? Stories. Stories of Gilgamesh, the king who sought immortality. Stories of Inanna, the goddess who descended into the underworld. Stories that we still tell today, their echoes reaching across 5,000 years to touch your dreams tonight. But bronze demanded sacrifice. The tin necessary for its creation came from distant lands, Cornwall in far-off Britain, the mountains of Afghanistan, the mysterious regions beyond the known world. This hunger for tin would drive humanity to its first great age of exploration, creating trade routes that stretched across continents like golden threads, binding cultures together in ways that had never existed before. As bronze tools made agriculture more efficient and warfare more deadly, something remarkable began to happen. Communities grew larger, hierarchies formed, and from the mud and reed villages of the river valleys, the first true kingdoms rose, like bronze statues reaching toward the heavens. In Egypt, the Nile ran red with clay, not blood, as workers hauled massive stones across the desert sands. The pharaohs, those god kings who claimed dominion over both the living and the dead, commanded resources on a scale never before imagined. Picture the scene. Tens of thousands of workers moving in perfect synchronization, their bronze tools glinting in the desert sun as the first great pyramids slowly took shape against the endless blue sky. "We are not just building tombs," declares Khufu, the pharaoh whose pyramid would stand as the tallest human-made structure for over 3,000 years. "We are building stairways to eternity itself. Every stone we place, every bronze chisel that shapes it, brings us closer to the gods." Meanwhile, in the Indus Valley, a different kind of civilization was taking root. The Harappans, whose true name we may never know, built cities with a precision that would make modern urban planners weep with envy. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, cities with running water, sophisticated drainage systems, and standardized weights and measures. All of it made possible by bronze tools that could cut stone with previously impossible precision. But perhaps the most dramatic transformation was happening in the highlands of Anatolia and the Caucasus Mountains, where metalworking reached new heights of sophistication. Here, smiths learned to create bronze alloys with specific properties: harder bronze for weapons, softer bronze for decorative work, and specialized alloys for tools that needed to bend without breaking. The social changes were just as profound as the technological ones. Bronze weapons created professional warrior classes. Bronze tools enabled agricultural surpluses that supported specialists, priests, scribes, artists, and administrators. Society was becoming stratified, complex, and for the first time in human history, truly urban. Trade routes multiplied like veins in a vast body, carrying not just goods but ideas, technologies, and dreams. A bronze axe forged in Mesopotamia might end up in the hands of a Celtic warrior thousands of miles away. A ceramic vessel from the Indus Valley might grace the table of an Egyptian nobleman. The world was becoming connected in ways that would not be seen again until our modern era. This is the age when history begins to blur with legend, when the deeds of mortals become so grand that they take on mythic proportions. The Bronze Age was reaching its full flower, and with it came stories of heroes whose names still echo through our collective memory. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh was being carved into clay tablets that would survive the rise and fall of empires. Listen to those ancient words, spoken in smoky taverns and palace courts. "I will proclaim to the world the deeds of Gilgamesh." Here was humanity's first great literary hero, a king who wielded weapons of bronze, who built walls to protect his people, and who embarked on a quest for immortality that speaks to the deepest yearnings of the human heart. But Gilgamesh was more than just a story. Archaeological evidence suggests he may have been based on a real king of Uruk, a ruler who lived during this golden age of bronze. Picture him striding through his city at dawn, his bronze armor gleaming, his weapons forged by the finest smiths in the world, a man caught between the mortal and divine, ruling over a civilization that was itself reaching toward godhood through its mastery of metal and stone. To the west, on the island of Crete, the Minoans were creating something unprecedented, a maritime empire built on Bronze Age technology and artistic achievement. Their palaces at Knossos and Phaistos weren't just administrative centers, they were celebrations of life itself, frescoes of dolphins dancing through azure seas, of bull leapers performing death-defying acrobatics, of women in elaborate dresses observing sacred rituals. "The sea is our highway," a Minoan trader might have said, watching his bronze-reinforced ships disappear beyond the horizon. Every island, every coast, every distant shore, all are connected by the paths we sail. Their influence spread throughout the Mediterranean, carrying with them not just goods but a celebration of beauty, sophistication, and the joy of being alive. In the north, along the windswept steppes, the first great horse cultures were emerging. The people we call the Proto-Indo-Europeans were mastering the art of horseback riding, combining it with bronze weaponry to create a mobile military force unlike anything the world had seen. These weren't just raiders, they were culture bearers, spreading languages, technologies, and mythologies that would eventually give birth to Greek, Roman, Celtic, Germanic, and Indian civilizations. The period also saw the rise of the first true empires. In Mesopotamia, Sargon of Akkad created the world's first multi-ethnic empire, stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. His bronze-equipped armies were unstoppable, but, more importantly, his vision of unified rule under a single monarch would become the template for every great empire that followed. "I am Sargon, the mighty king, king of Akkad," his inscriptions proclaim. "My city is Akkad. My mother conceived me in secret. She set me in a basket of rushes, with bitumen she sealed my lid. She cast me into the river which rose over me. The river bore me up and carried me to Aki, the drawer of water." This is the first recorded instance of the hero's journey, the narrative template that would later shape the stories of Moses, Perseus, and countless other legendary figures. If the earlier Bronze Age was humanity's adolescence, then this period was its confident young adulthood. Civilizations had matured, technologies had stabilized, and for 5 centuries much of the Bronze Age world enjoyed a level of prosperity, cultural sophistication, and international cooperation that would not be matched again for over a millennium. This was the age of the great palace civilizations. In Crete, the Minoan palaces reached their peak of sophistication. Imagine wandering through the corridors of Knossos at its height, rooms decorated with frescoes that seemed to glow with their own inner light, sophisticated plumbing systems that channeled fresh water throughout the complex, and archives filled with linear A tablets recording the minutiae of palace administration in a script we still cannot read. The Minoans weren't warriors in the traditional sense. Their art shows no great battles, no conquering heroes. Instead, they celebrated life, nature, and the beauty of the human form. Their women appear to have enjoyed a status unknown in most Bronze Age societies, participating in religious ceremonies, engaging in trade, and even ruling as priestess queens. Theirs was a civilization built not on conquest but on commerce, artistry, and what appears to have been a genuine love of life. Meanwhile, on the mainland of Greece, the Mycenaeans were building their own version of Bronze Age glory. These were the people who would later be remembered in Homer's epics, the Greeks who sailed to Troy, who built Cyclopean walls that still stand today, who created the first Greek writing system, Linear B. The Mycenaean palaces at Pylos, Tiryns, and Mycenae were centers of a complex bureaucratic state that controlled every aspect of Bronze Age life. Their scribes recorded everything: how many sheep belonged to each landholder, what tribute was owed by each village, which gods were to receive which sacrifices. But beneath this administrative detail lies a picture of a society at the height of its powers, a world of bronze-clad warriors, skilled craftsmen, international trade, and artistic achievement. In Anatolia, the Hittites were forging the world's first great iron-working tradition while still living in what was fundamentally a Bronze Age world. Their capital at Hattusa was a marvel of military engineering: massive stone walls, elaborate gates, and hidden tunnels that allowed defenders to launch surprise attacks on besiegers. But the Hittites were more than just warriors. They were diplomats, lawyers, and historians. Their archives preserve the first known written peace treaty, an agreement with Egypt that established principles of international law still recognized today. "See, I have given you a copy on a silver tablet," writes the Hittite king to his Egyptian counterpart. "The words which are on the silver tablet, for the land of Hatti and for the land of Egypt, in order that good peace and good brotherhood may be between them forever." This wasn't just diplomacy. It was a recognition that the Bronze Age world had become so interconnected, so interdependent, that war between great powers was ultimately self-destructive. Egypt during this period was reaching heights of power and artistic achievement that still leave us breathless. The New Kingdom pharaohs, Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Ramesses II. These weren't just rulers but patrons of a cultural renaissance that produced some of humanity's greatest artistic treasures. Picture the sun setting over the Valley of the Kings, its golden light illuminating tomb paintings that capture not just the features of long-dead pharaohs, but their hopes for immortality, their beliefs about the nature of existence itself. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this golden age was the emergence of what archaeologists call the Bronze Age international system, a network of diplomatic, commercial, and cultural relationships that connected civilizations from Ireland to India. Egyptian gold traveled to Mesopotamian temples. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan decorated Mycenaean daggers. Amber from the Baltic Sea was worked by craftsmen in the Eastern Mediterranean. Ideas, technologies, and artistic styles flowed along these same routes, creating the first truly cosmopolitan culture in human history. The Late Bronze Age was humanity's first global age. Across 3 continents, from the Atlantic shores of Spain to the mountains of Central Asia, bronze-working cultures shared remarkably similar technologies, artistic motifs, and even religious ideas. It was as if the entire ancient world was participating in a single, vast conversation conducted in the language of bronze. In China, the Shang dynasty was creating some of the most sophisticated bronze work ever achieved. Their ritual vessels, dings, guys, and jayas, weren't just functional objects but sophisticated theological statements, each one a bronze meditation on the relationship between heaven, earth, and human society. In the workshops of Anyang, craftsmen were perfecting techniques of bronze casting that wouldn't be matched in the West for another 1,000 years. The bronze speaks, a Shang diviner might have said, interpreting the cracks in oracle bones. The ancestors approve of our offerings. For the Shang, bronze wasn't just a useful metal, it was a medium through which the living could communicate with the dead, a bridge between the mortal world and the eternal realm of the ancestors. In Western Europe, the Bronze Age was reaching its own unique flowering. The cultures we call the Urnfield peoples were spreading across Central and Western Europe, bringing with them new technologies, new artistic styles, and new ways of organizing society. Their bronze swords, works of art as much as weapons, have been found from Scotland to Sicily, testament to both their martial prowess and their far-reaching trade networks. But perhaps nowhere was Bronze Age achievement more spectacular than in the Eastern Mediterranean, where the great powers of the age, Egypt, Hatti, Assyria, Mitanni, and the Mycenaean kingdoms, maintained a diplomatic system of astounding sophistication. The Amarna letters, discovered in the ruins of Akhenaten's capital, preserve the actual correspondence between these Bronze Age superpowers. Reading them is like eavesdropping on conversations between equals, rulers who addressed each other as brother, who exchanged gifts of gold, silver, and precious stones, who negotiated marriages between their children and shared intelligence about common enemies. To Amenhotep III, the king of Egypt, my brother, writes the Babylonian king, all goes well with me. May all go well with you, with your household, your wives, your sons, your magnates, your horses, your chariots, and, in your land may all go very well. This wasn't just diplomacy. It was the acknowledgement of a shared civilization, a recognition that the Bronze Age world had become so interconnected that the prosperity of one kingdom depended on the prosperity of all. The period also saw the first great age of exploration and maritime adventure. Bronze Age sailors were venturing farther than ever before, driven by the hunger for metals, exotic goods, and new lands to settle. Mycenaean pottery has been found as far west as Spain and as far east as Cyprus. Egyptian objects appear in Scandinavian graves. British tin was reaching the workshops of the Eastern Mediterranean. The world was becoming one market, one cultural zone, unified by the technology and artistry of bronze. Yet even at this height of achievement, subtle signs of trouble were beginning to appear. Climate change was making traditional agricultural regions less productive. Population pressure was increasing competition for resources. New military technologies, particularly the increasing use of iron weapons, were upsetting traditional balances of power. And in the north and west, new peoples were beginning to move, driven by forces we can only guess at, carrying with them a hunger for land, resources, and the wealth of the Bronze Age kingdoms. The first signs were subtle. A trading post abandoned here, a palace archive that suddenly stops recording transactions there. To those living through it, the end of the Bronze Age world probably felt like a series of minor disruptions, temporary setbacks that could be overcome with patience and diplomacy. They had no way of knowing they were witnessing the death of their civilization. The trouble began, as it so often does, on the periphery. In Anatolia, the Hittite Empire was facing increasing pressure from peoples to the north and west, groups the Hittites called the Gazka and the Kaska, mountain peoples, who had learned to use iron weapons with devastating effectiveness. "The land of the enemy overran my land," laments one Hittite king in a letter that was never sent. "They set fire to my cities and did evil to my lands repeatedly." But these weren't just random raids. Archaeological evidence suggests that this period saw significant climate change, droughts that lasted for decades, crop failures that forced entire populations to migrate in search of better land. The stable agricultural base that had supported Bronze Age civilization for over a millennium was beginning to crack. In Egypt, Ramesses II, Ramesses the Great, was spending unprecedented resources on military campaigns and monumental construction projects. His massive temples at Abu Simbel, his additions to Karnak, his new capital at Pi-Ramesses, all of these spoke to Egyptian confidence and power. Yet the royal archives also preserve increasing complaints about the cost of maintaining Egypt's far-flung empire, about the difficulty of finding suitable bronze for the royal workshops, about mysterious sea peoples who were raiding Egyptian shipping in the eastern Mediterranean. The Mycenaean kingdoms, those powerful palace states that had dominated the Aegean for centuries, were also showing signs of strain. Around 1250 BCE, many Mycenaean palaces were fortified with massive new, defensive walls, a sign that their rulers no longer felt secure behind the traditional palace gates. Linear B archives from this period record increasing military preparations, special taxes to fund defensive measures, and desperate attempts to secure adequate supplies of bronze and other strategic materials. "All the smiths are to contribute bronze for points for arrows and spears," reads one tablet from Pylos. "The bronze is to be weighed and recorded. Any smith who fails to contribute his share will be punished according to law." This isn't the confident administration of a secure kingdom. It's the desperate mobilization of a state under siege. The interconnected nature of Bronze Age civilization, which had been its greatest strength, was now becoming its greatest weakness. When trade routes were disrupted, entire industries collapsed. When one kingdom fell, others lost crucial allies and trading partners. When bronze became difficult to obtain, armies found themselves equipped with inferior weapons just as military pressures were reaching their peak. Yet even in this gathering darkness, there were moments of extraordinary heroism and cultural achievement. It was probably during this period that the events later commemorated in Homer's Iliad actually took place. The Siege of Troy, that 10-year war that would become the defining myth of Western civilization. Whether or not Achilles and Hector were real people, they represent something very real about this period. Bronze Age heroes facing impossible odds, fighting not just for glory, but for the survival of everything they held dear. "Sing, goddess, of the rage of Achilles," Homer would later write, "that brought countless sorrows upon the Greeks and sent many valiant souls of heroes to Hades." But perhaps what Homer was really singing about was the rage of an entire civilization that saw its world ending and fought desperately to preserve what it could of the old ways, the old glories, the old certainties that bronze had made possible. They came from the sea like a storm-given human form, ships with high prows and square sails, carrying warriors whose faces were hidden behind bronze masks and feathered headdresses. The Egyptians called them the Sea Peoples, but they were more than raiders or conquerors. They were the harbingers of the end, the final wave that would wash away the Bronze Age world forever. Who were they? Even today, we're not entirely sure. Egyptian inscriptions name them as the Palaset, the Cheker, the Shekelesh, the Denian, and the Weshesh, names that echo through history like distant thunder. Some scholars believe they were refugees from collapsing Mycenaean kingdoms. Others suggest they were new ethnic groups from the central Mediterranean or the Balkans. What we know for certain is that they possessed iron weapons, advanced maritime technology, and a desperate hunger for new lands to settle. Picture the scene as recorded on the walls of Medine Habu, Ramesses III's mortuary temple. Egyptian ships ramming into the vessels of the Sea Peoples, bronze-tipped arrows flying through the air like deadly rain, warriors falling into the churning waters of the Nile Delta. They came from the sea in their warships, Ramesses III recorded, and none could stand before them. But the Sea Peoples were as much symptom as cause of the Bronze Age collapse. By 1200 BCE, The great palace civilizations were already weakened by decades of climate change, resource depletion, and internal conflict. The Hittite Empire had effectively ceased to function. The Mycenaean palaces had been abandoned one by one. Even mighty Egypt was struggling to maintain its traditional borders. The collapse, when it came, was swift and total. Within a single generation, almost every major Bronze Age center east of the Adriatic was destroyed or abandoned. Hattusa, the Hittite capital, was burned and never reoccupied. Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos, the great centers of Mycenaean civilization, fell silent. Even cities that weren't physically destroyed often saw their populations scatter, their administrative systems collapse, their artistic traditions forgotten. The land of the Hittites was destroyed, reads an Assyrian inscription from this period. The land of Hanagalbat was made like something that had never existed. The land of Mitanni was overthrown. The land of Assyria alone remained. But even Assyria, the survivor, was reduced to a fraction of its former size and power. The most haunting aspect of this collapse was how complete it was. This wasn't just the fall of kingdoms or the replacement of one ruling dynasty by another. It was the death of entire ways of life. The art of writing disappeared from most regions for centuries. International trade networks that had operated for over 1,000 years simply vanished. Sophisticated technologies were lost, sometimes forever. Population levels dropped dramatically throughout the eastern Mediterranean and wouldn't recover for hundreds of years. Yet amid this devastation, some embers of Bronze Age civilization survived. In Egypt, though weakened, the pharaonic system continued. In Assyria, the royal archives preserved ancient learning. On Cyprus, bronzeworking continued even as it disappeared elsewhere, and most importantly, in the memories of survivors, the Great Age of Bronze lived on as legend. Stories of heroes and gods, of golden ages and lost perfection that would inspire future generations to rebuild what had been lost. The story of Troy's fall, preserved in oral tradition for centuries before Homer wrote it down, captures something essential about this moment. There was a city called Troy, the bards would sing. There was a war that lasted 10 years. There were heroes who fought and died for glory. And when it ended, the old world ended with it. In the wake of the Bronze Age collapse, darkness fell across much of the ancient world. Not the darkness of night which always gives way to dawn, but the deeper darkness of forgetting, the loss of skills, knowledge, and ways of life that had defined civilization for over 1,000 years. Greece, which had been home to some of the most sophisticated Bronze Age palaces, became a land of small villages and subsistence farming. The Mycenaean palaces stood empty, their massive walls slowly crumbling, their treasures scattered or lost. The art of writing disappeared entirely. Linear B was forgotten so completely that its very existence wasn't suspected until archaeologists rediscovered it in the early 20th century. Yet this wasn't a time of complete barbarism. In the shadows of the ruined palaces, new cultures were slowly taking root. The people we call the early Greeks were learning to work with iron, that harder, more common metal that would eventually democratize warfare and agriculture in ways that bronze never could. They were also preserving, in oral tradition, the memory of the Bronze Age world that their ancestors had known. Tell me, Muse, of the man of many ways, Homer's Odyssey begins, and in that simple phrase lies something profound about this dark age. The great deeds of Bronze Age heroes were being transformed into poetry, their historical reality becoming mythic truth. Achilles and Hector, Agamemnon and Menelaus, Odysseus and his long journey home. These weren't just entertainment, but cultural DNA, preserving the values, ideals, and memories of a lost civilization. In the Eastern Mediterranean, other survivors were adapting in their own ways. The Phoenicians, inheritors of Canaanite Bronze Age traditions, became the great traders and explorers of the Iron Age. Their ships, no longer carrying bronze ingots and luxury goods between great palaces, now ventured into the unknown Atlantic, establishing colonies as far away as Spain and North Africa. "We are the children of the sea," a Phoenician merchant might have said, watching his ship disappear beyond the Pillars of Hercules. "Where the waves go, we follow." Where they carry us, we make our homes. The Phoenicians couldn't recreate the Bronze Age world, but they could preserve its spirit of exploration and cultural exchange. Perhaps most importantly, it was during this dark age that the alphabet was invented, or rather, perfected. The Phoenicians took the idea of alphabetic writing, which had existed in crude form during the Bronze Age, and refined it into a system so simple and efficient that it could be learned by anyone. This wasn't just a technological advance, it was a democratization of knowledge, a way of ensuring that the hard-won wisdom of the past would never again be lost when palaces fell and scribal schools closed. In Mesopotamia, the ancient centers of learning managed to survive better than elsewhere. Babylon and Assyria, though reduced in power, maintained their scholarly traditions. Priests and scribes continued to copy ancient texts, preserving Sumerian literature, astronomical observations, and medical knowledge that would prove invaluable to future civilizations. "The old knowledge must not die," an elderly scribe might have muttered as he carefully copied a damaged tablet by lamplight. Even if the palaces fall, even if the kings are forgotten, the words must survive. These anonymous scholars were the true heroes of the Dark Age, not warriors or conquerors, but preservers of memory in an age of forgetting. The period also saw important developments in religious thought. With the collapse of the great palace religions that had dominated Bronze Age spirituality, new forms of religious expression began to emerge. The worship of Yahweh among the Israelites, the mystery religions of the Greek world, the ethical monotheism that would eventually give birth to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. All of these had their roots in the religious innovations of the post-Bronze Age dark period. What's remarkable is how many Bronze Age themes survived this transformation. The flood stories found in Genesis echo Mesopotamian accounts that date back to the early Bronze Age. The heroic ideals celebrated in Greek epic poetry preserve Bronze Age values. Even the biblical accounts of Solomon's temple describe a building technique, bronze casting on a massive scale, that harks back to Bronze Age architectural traditions. As the Dark Age slowly lifted, a new world began to emerge from the ashes of the old. This was the Iron Age, not just a different technology, but a different way of organizing society, understanding the world, and imagining human possibility. Yet everywhere, the influence of the Bronze Age past could be felt, like the deep notes of a bronze bell continuing to resonate long after it has been struck. In Greece, the city-states that would create democracy, philosophy, and classical art were consciously modeling themselves on Bronze Age predecessors. When the Athenians built their Parthenon, they weren't just creating a temple to Athena. They were attempting to recapture some of the glory that they imagined their Bronze Age ancestors had possessed. The very word hero, which became so central to Greek culture, originally referred to the bronze-clad warriors whose graves dotted the Greek landscape. "We are but shadows of our ancestors," Hesiod wrote in his Works and Days, describing his own time as the debased age of iron that followed the glorious age of heroes. This sense that the present was a falling away from past greatness, that earlier generations had possessed wisdom and virtue that later ages had lost, became one of the defining characteristics of Iron Age culture. Yet in many ways, the Iron Age represented not decline, but fulfillment of Bronze Age aspirations. The literacy that had been restricted to palace scribes in the Bronze Age became widespread in Iron Age Greece. The international trade that had connected Bronze Age kingdoms now supported independent city-states. The artistic traditions that had served Bronze Age kings now celebrated the achievements of entire communities. In the Near East, the great empires of the Iron Age, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, consciously presented themselves as heirs to Bronze Age greatness. When Nebuchadnezzar rebuilt Babylon, he decorated it with bronze gates that recalled the metalworking achievements of earlier ages. When Persian kings commissioned palace reliefs, they included scenes of tribute-bearing that echoed Bronze Age artistic conventions. But perhaps the most profound Bronze Age legacy was literary. The Epic of Gilgamesh, first composed during the Ashur, early Bronze Age, was copied and recopied throughout the Iron Age, eventually influencing everything from Greek epic poetry to biblical literature. The story of a king who sought immortality, who grieved for his dead friend, who ultimately learned to accept the limitations of human existence. This remained as compelling to Iron Age readers as it had been to Bronze Age audiences. Similarly, the Homeric epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, preserved Bronze Age memories in Iron Age poetry. Modern archaeology has confirmed that many details in Homer's poems accurately reflect Bronze Age realities. The use of bronze weapons, the political organization of Mycenaean kingdoms, even specific architectural features of Bronze Age palaces. These poems weren't just entertainment, but cultural memory, keeping alive the achievements and ideals of a vanished world. In China, the Zhou dynasty, which overthrew the Bronze Age Shang around 1046 BCE, continued and expanded Shang bronze working traditions. Zhou bronze vessels were even more elaborate than their Shang predecessors, their inscriptions more detailed, their ritual significance more complex. The Chinese had learned the lesson that the Mediterranean world forgot during its Dark Age. That technological change didn't have to mean cultural discontinuity. The Hebrew Bible, compiled during the Iron Age from much older oral and written traditions, preserves fascinating glimpses of Bronze Age culture. The accounts of Solomon's Temple, with its massive bronze pillars and elaborate bronze furnishings, reflect genuine knowledge of Bronze Age architectural techniques. The stories of patriarchs like Abraham and Jacob preserve memories of Bronze Age social structures and religious practices. What emerges from all this is a picture of Iron Age civilizations that were simultaneously innovative and nostalgic, forward-looking and backward-glancing. They had learned to work with iron, which was cheaper and more readily available than bronze. They had developed new forms of government, new types of literature, new ways of thinking about the divine. Yet they continued to measure their achievements against Bronze Age standards, continued to tell Bronze Age stories, continued to dream Bronze Age dreams. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, consider this. The Bronze Age never really ended. Not entirely. Its influence flows through our culture like an underground river, surfacing in unexpected places, nourishing traditions we barely recognize as Bronze Age in origin. Every time we speak of heroes, we're using a concept that first emerged in Bronze Age Greece. Every time we admire works of art that combine beauty with functionality, we're responding to aesthetic ideals first developed in Bronze Age workshops. Every time we read stories about kings and queens, gods and monsters, quests for immortality and journeys to the underworld, we're participating in narrative traditions that stretch back to the first Bronze Age cities. The very idea of civilization, of humans working together on a scale larger than the family or tribe, of specialization in urban life, of written law and monumental architecture. These are Bronze Age inventions that we still live with today. The Code of Hammurabi, inscribed on stone nearly 4,000 years ago, established legal principles that continue to influence modern jurisprudence. The urban planning of Bronze Age cities like Mohenjo-Daro set precedents for city design that contemporary planners still study. But perhaps the deepest Bronze Age legacy is psychological. The Bronze Age was the first time that humans created something that outlasted their individual lives. Cities that endured for centuries, works of art that remained beautiful across generations, stories that continued to inspire long after their original tellers were dust. This was when humans first seriously grappled with questions of permanence and legacy, mortality and meaning that continue to define the human condition. What is it that makes a man immortal? Gilgamesh asked his friend Enkidu 4,000 years ago. Is it the cities we build, the children we raise, the stories we tell? These questions, first posed during humanity's Bronze Age, remain as urgent today as they were when bronze was the most advanced technology humanity possessed. The collapse of Bronze Age civilization teaches us something equally important, that no human achievement, no matter how grand, is permanent. The palaces crumble, the kingdoms fall, the trade routes are abandoned, but something persists, not in bronze or stone, but in memory, in story, in the cultural DNA that passes from generation to generation like an eternal flame. As you close your eyes and let sleep take hold, imagine yourself walking through the ruins of a Bronze Age palace. The walls are broken, the roofs have collapsed, weeds grow through cracks in the paved courtyards. Yet in the failing light, you can almost see the ghosts of those who lived here. The kings in their bronze crowns, the craftsmen at their forges, the scribes bent over their tablets, the children playing games that their descendants would play for millennia to come. They built their world in bronze, but they built it for eternity. And in a way, they succeeded. Every sunset that turns the sky the color of molten bronze, every story of heroism that stirs the human heart, every moment when we choose to create rather than destroy, these are their monuments, more lasting than any palace, more precious than any treasure. The Bronze Age lives on in the deepest layers of human memory, in the stories we tell our children, in the dreams we dream when night falls and the modern world grows quiet. It lives on in our yearning for connection across vast distances, in our belief that human beings can work together to create something greater than themselves, in our stubborn insistence that beauty and meaning matter even in a world that often seems chaotic and cruel. So sleep now, and let the Bronze Age enter your dreams. Let yourself walk through those ancient streets, hear those ancient voices, touch those ancient walls still warm from the day's sun, feel the weight of bronze in your hands, that miraculous metal that changed everything, that taught humanity its first great lessons about transformation, about turning the raw materials of the earth into tools and weapons and works of art that would outlast their makers. In your dreams, you might find yourself standing beside an ancient smith as he pours molten bronze into a mold, the metal flowing like liquid sunlight, taking shape as a sword blade, or a ceremonial vessel, or a statue of a god. You might walk through the hanging gardens of Babylon, smell the cedar of Lebanon being shaped into the supports of Solomon's temple, hear the splash of oars as Mycenaean ships set sail for Troy. You might witness the moment when the first Bronze Age scribe pressed a reed into wet clay and captured human thought in written form, making it immortal. You might stand in the court of Gilgamesh as he wrestles with questions that still trouble the human heart. You might see the sea peoples approaching across dark waters, their coming marking the end of one world and the birth of another. And when you wake, remember this: you are the heir of the Bronze Age. In your blood flow the dreams of those ancient kings and queens, smiths and scribes, warriors and poets. In your mind live their stories, their hopes, their hard-won wisdom, about what it means to be human in a world that is both beautiful and terrible, permanent and fragile, meaningful and mysterious. The Bronze Age gave us our first cities, our first empires, our first great works of literature. But most importantly, it gave us our first serious attempt to answer the question that every human being must face. What does it mean to live a life worth remembering? What kind of legacy do we want to leave behind? Their answer was bronze. Beautiful, useful, eternal bronze that could be shaped into anything the human imagination could conceive. Our answer may be different, but the question remains the same. And as long as human beings look up at the stars and wonder about their place in the vast cosmos, as long as we tell stories and build cities and create art, the Bronze Age will never truly end. It will live on in the bronze-colored light of dawn, in the ring of metal on metal, in every story that begins with "Once upon a time there was a kingdom." It will live on in our dreams, where the ancient world is always present, always real, always calling to us across the centuries with its promise that human beings working together can create wonders that last forever. Sleep well, dreamer of bronze dreams. The ancient world is waiting for you, just beyond the edge of consciousness, ready to share its secrets, its stories, its eternal vision of human possibility. And when you wake, you'll carry a piece of it with you, a fragment of that first great age when humanity learned to transform the very earth beneath its feet into beauty, into meaning, into hope, the Bronze Age. Where our story as civilized beings began, where our greatest dreams were first dreamed, where we learned that the only thing stronger than bronze is the human spirit that shapes it. If this journey through the Bronze Age moved you, if it helped you see the ancient world in a new light, if it made you feel connected to those dreamers and builders who lived so long ago, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What part of Bronze Age civilization fascinated you most? What questions do you still have about this remarkable period in human history? Your engagement helps us continue exploring the ancient world together, one story at a time.